Can we just have a moment of peace for the death of a franchise and wonder out loud, how did we never get a Punk Goes Pop cover of Sarah McLachlan? Like all the emo kids could have gone out and adopted dogs if we had gotten this. Remember when Punk Goes Pop was like the biggest thing on the block from the late 2000s into the early to mid 2010s? You could not go without hearing these covers. It was your favorite Warped Tour band just giving their spin on a top 40 hit, whether it be Escape the Fate doing Rob Thomas and Santana's iconic hit Smooth, or something more recent like Dance Gavin Dance taking a spin on Bruno Mars's That's What I Like. The franchise was regularly put out by Fearless Records every few years, but at this point, I think I can officially declare it DOA or else in deep hibernation because it's been 5 years. 2017 was the last version of Punk Goes Pop, and that was Volume 7. If you're anything like me, I was this kid that grew up thinking the Punk Goes Pop covers were just the most badass things in the entire world, because I was definitely a scene kid, or at the very least a scene adjacent emo-leaning kid, and they knew how to pander to those kids to a T. With the rise of MySpace in the mid-2000s, and that sound being very marketable, Fearless Records knew that they were sitting on a nest egg here. But how to hatch, how to take this top 40 with covers of top 40 songs? Well, you have to get on every single Warped Tour band, and I also feel that's kind of what led to their demise in the long run. I can't speak. I gave a passing mention to the Punk Goes franchise in a recent episode of 7 on Sunday, and I was surprised by the amount of comments that I got from people who wanted me to explore this even more. So, with this being the 20th anniversary of the first Punk Goes Pop album that came out back in 2002, I want to do exactly that. Number one, put some respect on the franchise's name, because even if we do feel that so many of these are cringeworthy now, we probably were raised by this franchise, okay? This is us getting into pop music and realizing that it's not always terrible. Sometimes we just need a few additional guitars and maybe a little breakdown to get us into it. All the way back in 2002, the Punk Goes Pop franchise actually stuck to its name. It was literal punk bands going pop, which is something that somehow completely shifted by the time we got to Volume 2. But also, they went 7 years in between releases. They went 02 to 09, and by that point, MySpace, the scene, everything had been turned on its head, so now we get like Escape the Fate and 4 Years Strong, and some of these covers are still holding up pretty well, but I'm just saying that a lot of the bands on the bill for Part 2 already weren't punk, so it kind of jumped the shark. The Punk Goes Pop albums actually peaked inside the Billboard Top 20 Albums chart twice, with Volume 2 in 2009, and also again in 2012 with Volume 5. That had some surprisingly big cover songs that are still being talked about and streamed, at least in some corners to this day. I think Punk Goes Pop had a tipping point in 2011 with the release of Volume 4, because there were actually some really good covers on there. Little Lion Man by Tonight Alive, Just the Way You Are by Pierce the Veil, and my personal favorite, Runaway, originally by Kanye West, covered epically by Down with Webster and Silverstein. It wasn't a peak in terms of commercial success because that was actually Volume 5, but by the time we got to Volume 5 in 2014, the spark was officially gone. And then with Volume 7 in 2017, it felt like somebody had taken a vacuum to the room and just sucked out the soul, because this franchise increasingly went downhill the more the label executives told them you can only cover current songs and you have to do it the YouTube way, the Our Last Night way, because I don't want to point fingers, but Our Last Night have a formula. The formula is a formula, and I get that it works for so many people, but how many times can we say, oh my god, they took a pop song and made it rock, without it not being ridiculously boring, especially if you're setting it up the exact same way every single time? It's watching the dominoes fall. When will they get to the guitars? When will they add in a scream? When is it gonna come through and give us a little breakdown on what was originally a Katy Perry song? Punk Goes Pop got stale, and also Fearless Records were so inconsistent about it in the first place, maybe they had a hard time lining up bands and talent that would actually commit to being on the album, because in this day and age, as social media, as streaming have dominated, the bands could just go out and drop their own cover. They don't need Fearless. Now, of course, the Punk Goes Pop franchise would sometimes feature smaller bands, and maybe it would be a big break for them. I think they featured Chiodos pretty early on, and a band like Grayscale got to do a cover of Love Yourself by Justin Bieber. I'm not commenting on these covers' quality, but I do feel that it gave some exposure. But I also feel that the ultimate demise of this franchise, even though it could be revived in the future, RIP, gone too soon, I feel that the death of Vans Warped Tour and the death of the cross-country tour that gave a break to so many bands was also the bane of Punk Goes Pop's existence, because it boosted it up, but it also tore it down when it went away. Fearless Records oversaturated the Punk Goes brand, because it wasn't just Punk Goes Pop that was obviously the most sequeled and also the most popular, but never forget that Punk Goes Crunk was a thing. And not a good one at that. And we also have lasting memories of Punk Goes Acoustic, some of which are actually pretty great, and then you've got Punk Goes 90s, and you know, it's the whole now that's what I call music all over again, except for the scene kids. I just don't think Punk Goes Pop has relevancy at this point, beyond the name recognition, because bands could be taking matters into their own hands, going DIY. They don't need to wait for Fearless Records to approach them and say, hey, would you like to cover a song out of this list? When they could just cover whatever song they want to, and they could drop it whenever they want to, and they could market it the way they see fit, and maybe they wouldn't have to stay to this cookie cutter formula. On one hand, it's sad to be discussing the possible death of a franchise, but on the other, I just don't feel that Punk Goes Pop has a reason to be relevant beyond name recognition at this point. It's a brand, and it's something that will be recognizable with some music fans out there, especially in the pop punk emo scene. But beyond that, I don't feel like they would connect to new audiences, and that was reflected in the lack of chart success for Volume 7 5 years ago. It only charted at number 79, and those compilations typically debuted in the top 40. So to see things going downhill, it seems like maybe Fearless got ahead of the curve and just said, hey, we're gonna pull the plug because this doesn't financially make sense for us. And also, as judging by the thumbnail that I gave for this video, I wasn't too happy with the quality of the covers in the later years. I know I'm gonna get this question, so before I end the video, let's go ahead and sort of rank these albums in a tier list just so you can see my opinions, because my personal favorite is probably actually Punk Goes Pop Volume 4. Here you go, people. I don't think this needs a ton of explaining, but this is the way that I would rank them with their corresponding letters. Alright guys, I think I'm gonna pull the plug right there. I hope you enjoyed this reflection on Punk Goes Pop. What's your favorite album or the favorite compilation in the entire Punk Goes series? Let me know in the comments, or maybe if you've got a most hated cover too. If you want to check out some more videos, including that episode of SOS I mentioned, then tap the cards on screen, and I'll be back soon with more right here on Beyond AR TV.